Welcome to this digital lecture. So having decided to start the business, the entrepreneur needs to have a plan to produce products or supply services and to attract the optimum marketing, operations, management team and financing to get the business off to a good start. Now this plan needs to address all these key areas in order that it becomes a credible discussion document between the entrepreneur and whoever the intended audience happens to be, which could include the business owners themselves, their employees, financial investors, landlords, suppliers or enterprise support agencies. Now the time frame covered by the plan can vary depending on the stage of development and the needs of the business, and it's important to reiterate that a plan is not the truth. It's simply a construct of the entrepreneur's vision which outlines their goals and how they plan to achieve them. Now some plans take only a few hours to write, while others can take years, and this is simply a reflection of the entrepreneur's level of commitment to the idea and also the stage that they are at in the business venturing process. So in this session we'll examine how to take a business model and use a feasibility plan to develop the product and identify the framework needed to convert this into a real business. So in terms of learning outcomes, by the end of this session you should be able to explain the process of developing a feasibility plan, apply the process of feasibility planning to your own business idea, and also build a simple financial model for your own business idea which takes account of both the revenue streams and also the cost structure. Now having an idea is not enough to launch a business. We also need to demonstrate that our idea and the business opportunity it offers has been thoroughly thought through. And the process for doing this is as follows. Firstly, we need to carry out some research, and here we're looking to improve our general knowledge around the idea itself. Then we have prototyping, which involves coming up with a basic idea for a product which is both aesthetic and practical. And then we have feasibility planning, where we'll build a structure for a business in order to determine if it's worth pursuing. But we've also got to think about market testing, and here we need to come up with a logical approach to test our product with real customers before committing to a full launch. Now remember that, as with the business model, any plan for the business should be viewed very much as a work in progress and as a cycle which is continuous. And the key elements of this cycle are, firstly, we need to learn, and to do this we need to be open to new ideas, conduct research, speak to a diverse range of people and get them to help us firm up our basic idea. We also need to experiment, and here we apply what we've learned and try different things out, and we should start early and fail early, risking only what we can afford to lose, and in doing so we'll learn from the process as we go along. And then we need to plan, and here we reflect on the learning experimentation process and plan what we're going to do next. And finally we'll reshape, and here we adapt and modify the original idea based on all the things that we've learned along the way. Now the business plan is basically a written document that explains and analyses an existing or a proposed business model. However, simply developing a business plan will not in itself guarantee success. The business plan is basically simply a set of guesses, and it's not possible to accurately predict the future. Therefore, uncertainty cannot be eliminated from the process. And if the business plan is to have any credibility, it's essential that the information used in the plan is accurate, unbiased and up to date. There's no universal ideal length of the plan, and this will depend very much upon the nature and level of complexity of the business idea which you're trying to explain and explore. There are a number of different types of plan used in the context of business. However, the most common of these are strategic plans, business plans and feasibility plans. Strategic plans set out the long-term focus of the business. Business plans focus on the operational issues, and feasibility plans highlight basically whether an idea is doable or not. Now in this module we'll be using a feasibility plan to demonstrate that our idea is desirable, viable and feasible. And in this session I'll take you through the process of developing a feasibility plan step by step. But first, watch this short video which provides a brief overview of the key stages in this process.
Created using Powtoon.
So for assignment 1, you need to submit the following documents, and we'll be discussing and completing these support documents as we progress through the module. In addition to the core feasibility study, we also need to submit a business model canvas, a market test tool, an opportunity screening checklist, and also a basic budget planner. Now that we have developed a viable business model, we need to consider the next step in the process, namely the development of a credible plan. Now, we've established that the plan is not the truth, and we've established that developing the plan itself will not guarantee success. But what we need to consider here is that we need to answer all the basic questions that the audience will expect us to have the answers to. And basically these questions fall into the following categories. Is there a business there at all? Does it have a reasonable chance of success? Could it be profitable? And could we logically gather all the resources we need in order to get the business off the ground? The feasibility plan contains far less detail than a traditional business plan, and the functions of the plan itself are to communicate the business model, to convey the credibility of the business idea, to be an organising tool for the entrepreneur, and also to show that it can actually be done. And the actual process of business planning is as follows. Firstly, we need to set preliminary goals. Here we need to determine who our audience is, what they want to know, and how they will use the information that we're giving them. Once some basic research has been completed, the entrepreneur should review this and, if necessary, modify the original goals in order to develop a basic outline for the plan. This outline should provide enough detail to be useful to both the entrepreneur and their audience, and it's basically the skeleton of the final plan itself. Generally, the first draft of a plan leaves more questions than answers, and this is a normal part of the process. Most entrepreneurs simply sit down and write the plan itself, giving little thought to the process involved. And here are a few top tips you consider if you want to approach this process in a more structured way. So the plan itself should firstly use normal language. You should write the plan in plain language, because if you don't understand the terminology, then no one else will. It should also be professionally presented. You're using the plan to effectively set out your stall, so it needs to look the part. And it should also be written for an outsider. You should assume the reader has no personal knowledge of the subject, as they probably won't. And then you should be really focused with your plan. You should keep it simple and don't overcomplicate things. And the plan should also be based on reality. Overly optimistic statements or claims which you can't support will just undermine your credibility. And you also need to avoid using jargon. Technical jargon will only raise the need for the reader to ask lots more questions, and that's ultimately defeating the purpose of the plan itself. And it's also worth noting that no two business plans are the same, and the level of detail for each section of the plan will depend on how complex the business idea actually is. So let's now look at the overview of the business. Now, the overview of the business is more than just a simple introduction. It's basically the whole plan, only shorter. And in many cases, the people who read your plan won't go any further than the overview or an executive summary and the financials. The overview should be a vision of what you want to achieve, and you should ideally wait until you've finished the plan before writing it. The length of the overview depends on the complexity of the business. So next we need to give some thought to the staffing requirements of the business, and here we're talking about both management and employees. And remember, these are likely to be the same people carrying out these roles in a small business. The actual amount of people needed will depend on the size of the business itself, and also the skills and experience of those running the business and the requirements of the business. As organisations grow, the entrepreneur's role must change. The managing role needs to adapt to increases in the numbers of employees and the volume and complexity of the work which needs to be carried out. And when thinking about the best structure for the business, you'll need to address the following issues. Firstly, with strategy and operations, you need to think about what tasks the enterprise actually needs to perform. Then there's organisation, and here we're thinking about how the tasks should be structured and coordinated. Then we have basic staffing. We need to think about who should do the work and what skills do they have or need to have to help them to do this. And then we also have to think about the cost implications of this. Can you actually afford to pay someone to do the work, or should you just do the work itself initially or in the short term? Now, very few individuals actually manage to get a business off the ground, and this is because not everyone has a desire to start a business, and of those that do, not all will attempt to start up, and of those who attempt, not all will succeed in starting up. The information in this section must demonstrate that the management and staff have the necessary skills, experience and qualities, and the information provided here should include key information about the management team and key staff, an explanation of the role in the business, details of relevant experience within the business, details of any skills gaps, and also details of any additional training required. So now let's look at business objectives, and in this section you should list all the major goals that you set for your business along with the objectives that you have to achieve these goals. And it's important to demonstrate here that these objectives are achievable by including specific numbers and dates where appropriate. And the following timeframes can be useful when filling in this section. In terms of short term, think about 0 to 12 months, medium term 12 to 36 months, and for long term think about 36 months onwards. Business objectives should be SMART, i.e. they should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time bound. This example of simple short, medium and long term objectives has been taken from a real business and illustrates the concept of a SMART objective. The feasibility plan needs to mention key partners, and this should include anyone who will be important in terms of helping you to achieve your objectives, and this would normally include parties such as your management team, financial investors, staff, suppliers of goods and materials, your customers, any subcontractors and other people who play a key role such as your landlord. You also need to highlight any key activities of the business, and this relates to whatever basic tasks the business will perform daily, weekly or monthly, such as opening and closing any venues, handling cash, recruiting and training staff, developing new products, marketing activities and customer service and sales activities. You also need to consider what key resources we'll need for the business, such as the best option for the business in terms of a trading base. And when developing a new enterprise, the physical infrastructure is very important, so the following factors should be considered here. You need to select the most appropriate type of premises, whether that is home-based or commercial premises. And remember, this can change as the business grows and develops. You also need to consider the most advantageous location of any premises and the best configuration of those premises in order to satisfy the basic operational needs of your business. Another key resource we need to consider is staff, and the staffing level for the business will be ultimately determined by a number of factors such as the nature of the work being carried out, the volume of this work, and the operational requirements of the business. And you also need to highlight your value proposition, which is often called a USP or a unique selling proposition. And here it can be helpful to start by asking yourself the following very simple question: why would anyone buy from you? Now, we also need to remember that your business model needs to be structured in such a way as to allow you to deliver your USP. And remember, a successful model needs to be feasible, i.e. can you gather the necessary resources to pull it off? Desirable, meaning will people actually want to buy your product? And lastly, viable, or in other words, can you demand a price that makes the effort worthwhile? So with this in mind, look at the 3 products shown here. Now, these are the 3 top selling unflavoured bottled waters in the UK, and speaking purely as a customer, to me they look like they're the same size, they taste the same and have pretty much identical packaging. One is French, one is Scottish and one is Swiss, and all 3 have strong brands which conjure up images of crystal clear mountain waters, and yet the top selling brand here is 10% more expensive than the next top 2 sellers. So given that the product appears virtually identical, consider the following questions. In what way is one better than the other? And secondly, how could you develop a product that would have any chance of competing with them? So now we need to think about how best to approach the market, and any marketing strategy has the potential to polarise opinion in either a positive or a negative way. The reality is that the product itself is neutral, and it's our personal perception that influences the degree to which we are interested in making a specific purchase. With this in mind, a new product or business has a greater chance of success if we adopt a pull approach rather than promote a push approach to marketing. In real terms, this means that rather than simply broadcasting what we do to people who may be interested in our product, we instead create a product that is capable of satisfying the customer's needs and wants, and in doing so we can potentially pull them towards our offering by making it desirable. Now, it's very important to carry out some basic research around your customer segments in order to establish the type of relationship you'll need to build with each of those segments. Now, as can be seen here, there are countless ways in which you can obtain information on the nature and extent of the market. However, when carrying out your research, you should not rely on one single source of information, but instead employ a mixed method whereby you speak to people firsthand, what we call primary research, whilst also making use of data gathered by others, which we refer to as secondary research. So now let's look briefly at the financial considerations for the feasibility plan. And here we're talking about the cost structure and the revenue stream sections from a business model canvas. This section should be written for someone who has no knowledge of the business and must clearly explain exactly what your business does, whilst also highlighting your products and services, including the benefits that they offer to your potential customers. You need to also make it clear who will supply the products and services. In terms of specific content, you consider the following points. So firstly, we need to think about price, and here you need to give examples of what you will charge customers for your products. You also need to explain how you arrived at this price and state your costs and your margins and how they compare to competitors within your sector. Next, we have distribution, and here you need to explain how will you get your goods and services to your customers. Then we have design and packaging, and here you need to describe your branding, your logo, and any design ideas that you have. And if packaging is required, you should explain how you'll package your product. You also need to provide some discussion about your product range, i.e. how many different products will you have, and also talk a little about service, or in other words, how you'll interact with your customers. And lastly, you need to mention quality in terms of what level of quality you will offer and how you'll ensure quality is maintained. Now clearly, quality will have a real impact on your cost structure, and whether they are fixed or variable, costs are a real concern for any entrepreneur, and these need to be structured in such a way that the business is sustainable. This means consideration must be given to the type of problems which arise around costs and potential solutions that you may have to these problems. And here's a few examples of this. So our first potential problem is high startup costs, and the solution here is simply to make do with less. The mistake that new business owners often make is to borrow and spend more than is actually needed to set up and start the business. And this can place a heavy financial burden on the business and impact significantly on cash flow. The next potential problem is having too much stock, and we can solve this by basically selling more stuff. Now this might sound overly simplistic, but in reality, poor inventory control can result in significant sums of cash being tied up in stock, which is slow to sell, and new businesses often get into financial difficulty due to poor stock management. Another problem can be bad payments, and the solution to this is to not give credit in the first place to your customers. A business can encounter financial difficulties for a variety of reasons. However, poor credit control is a common cause, and the simplest solution is to not offer credit terms to any customer for any reason. The next issue is seasonality, which relates to the peaks and troughs in a business's income due to seasonal buying patterns of the customer. And the basic solution for overcoming seasonality is to put cash aside. Most businesses experience seasonal peaks and troughs which are specific to their sector or their geographical location. And one way to offset the impact of seasonality is to build up reserves of cash to protect against reduced sales during slower periods. The next issue is high cash burn rate, and we can offset this by reducing costs. A business can make a profit, but if it runs out of cash, then it's ultimately out of business. The business burns cash continuously because of fixed costs, and these are expenses incurred regardless of sales, and variable costs, which are expenses linked directly to the sale. For example, food for a catering company. A business which does not have the cash to meet its operating expenses is deemed to be insolvent, and sooner or later it will be forced to cease trading. Reducing costs can allow a business in difficulty to trade on. Now, undoubtedly, the greatest challenge for the business is not having enough cash, and the solution to this is to increase our margin. Cash is important as it is essential in order to run the business on a day-to-day basis. If a business is trading but it seems impossible to generate a surplus of cash, then the issue may be with the profit margin rather than sales. Profit is simply the surplus generated by the operating activities of the business minus the cost of operation, and it's needed in order to generate a surplus to reinvest and develop the business. The business owner may also encounter the problem of not having enough pay, and here we can dip into our cash reserves if we have them. When business owners are unable to pay themselves regularly, this is generally because the business lacks the basic financial reserves needed to take confidence in the business's ability to generate a regular surplus. We also need to give some thought here to pricing, and most new businesses struggle to get their pricing strategy right from the outset and often strive to be both better and cheaper than the competition. Now, regardless of the strategy employed, the basic formula in which a business will base its pricing can be described as follows. We have basic production costs plus on costs plus a profit margin, and this equals price. Now, for the feasibility plan, you must make a reasonable estimate of what you will sell, what you will charge, and how much you will sell, and this can admittedly be very hard to do. So the following exercise is designed to allow you to build your own financial model for your chosen business idea in a structured way using a very simple template. And remember, you're not required here to complete a full business plan for this module. You're only being asked to provide basic financial information in your feasibility plan using the basic budget tool. So read through the information provided in this example, and you might want here to pause this presentation in order to give yourself enough time to think through the financial implications of going ahead with this project. So given everything we know, is this project doable and is it worthwhile? Now, in the real world, in order to make a balanced decision about whether or not to launch a business, you need to consider the following questions. What is the objective? Meaning, what is the goal of the business owner? Is it to open 1 store or 100 stores? What is the cash burn rate? And remember, businesses burn cash continuously, and it's important to have a good handle on how fast this occurs. What is the contingency plan? So if things do not work out the way we hope they will, what is plan B? Is it worth investing time and money? So once everything has been evaluated, is it actually worth the effort? What is your growth potential? So do you want to keep the business small or build a business of scale, and is this actually even achievable? And finally, where will you get the funds from? Now, getting access to funding for a new start business is extremely difficult, and funding is an ongoing challenge for any business. It's understandably easier for an established business to obtain financial support than a new start with no track record. So now let's consider growth potential. So according to Shaper et al. 2013, there are 3 types of business growth, namely financial, organisational and strategic. Financial growth relates to the development of the business as a commercial entity. It's concerned with increases in sales, the investment needed to achieve those sales, and the resulting profits. It's also concerned with increases in what the business owns, i.e. its assets. Organisational growth, on the other hand, relates to changes that take place in the organisational structure, process and culture as it grows and develops. The structure of the organisation, the way that structure develops as the organisation grows, is both a response to the circumstances in which the organisation finds itself and a reaction to business opportunities that present themselves. And finally, we have strategic growth, and this covers the changes that take place in the way in which the organisation interacts with its environment as a coherent whole. This represents business success in drawing resources from the environment to exploit a presence in the marketplace. Growth will influence the 2 basic sources of competitive advantage: cost and differentiation. So now we need to explain where we're going to get the funds from to actually start the business. Now, in general terms, there are 2 routes to obtaining funding: internal sources and external sources. So let's look first at internal funding, and we'll start with personal capital, and this is your own money, whether it's come from savings, redundancy payments or inheritance. It is liquid, which means you can draw on it without needing the permission of another party, and that can be quite useful. Then we have working capital or retained profits, and many businesses start trading early in the process and they use the surplus generated initially to reinvest back in the business to allow it to grow more quickly. But we can also obtain funding from friends and family, and this is a very common and easily accessed source of potential startup capital. Family and friends generally have a completely different motivation for providing financial support to a family member. Whereas a traditional lender such as a bank will be looking for a commercial return on their investment, the friend or family member is more than likely to be motivated by a desire to help out, although they may still want their investment repaid and may also be looking for a financial return. This is less important. So now let's look at external sources of funding, and the most common here is debt finance, and this involves traditional loan funding, which includes the banks but also relates to other bodies who lend money to businesses with an expectation of a commercial return. Next we have public funding, and this can also be in the form of loans, but it also refers to grants which do not need to be repaid as long as all the conditions have been met. Grants tend to be extremely limited and are quickly exhausted by uptake, and grants should be neither expected or relied upon. Now we have equity finance, which can be public or private, and this involves giving away a share or a stake in the business in order to attract investment. And equity funding is generally viewed by most people as being the least desirable option, in that it means you are relinquishing a degree of control in your own business. This type of finance is generally the preserve of larger businesses looking to raise significant sums of cash to grow very quickly. Now, in order to grow, the business needs to adopt the most appropriate strategy, and these strategies can be either internal or external. And if we look firstly at internal strategies, these can take one or more of the following forms. So firstly, we can increase market share, and this is the simplest way to grow a business, and this is achieved by simply taking customers away from the existing competition. New businesses need to build market share very quickly. However, for a growing business, it's equally important. Nearly 90% of successful growth businesses grow by selling more of their existing products and services to existing customers and others like them. Most businesses grow organically, but we can also grow the business through new product development, and launching new products can provide potential or existing customers with a fresh offering that does not currently exist, and this can be a very powerful driver of business growth. We can also improve existing products or services, and this can extend the lifespan of a core product, allowing the business to continue to grow sales when otherwise the product would have become obsolete, resulting in reduced sales. But we can also look at international expansion to grow the business, and whilst exporting can be risky and can require significant investment, the potential gains of opening up new markets is obvious, particularly where the domestic sector is saturated and competition is particularly high. Now, external growth strategies rely on establishing relationships with third parties, and this can include things like strategic alliances. And a strategic alliance is an ongoing relationship between two businesses in which they combine their efforts for a specific purpose that benefits both parties. If the strategic alliance takes place between competitors, it can often lead to a merger of the two companies later. In this case, the two companies merge to form a new legal entity. But another approach is licensing, and here a licensor may grant a license under intellectual property laws to authorise a use such as copying software or using a patented invention to another party who we call a licensee. A license may have a number of components such as a time period of use and the geographic territory covered by the license, and many businesses use this approach to grow their business. Then we have acquisitions, and many small businesses Grow in this way by buying over other businesses. These businesses may be doing the same type of work in the same sector, or maybe doing something quite different which brings a benefit to the core business of the purchaser and opens up new revenue streams or brings cost savings. Ultimately, the rationale for examining the market considerations for our business idea is to demonstrate that the idea is doable, and to do this we must consider: what exactly are you selling? What are the advantages and disadvantages of the product or service? How is your product or service differentiated? Is it a product looking for a market or a market looking for a product? How do you define your niche? How is the need being filled now? Who or what is the competition? And how are we going to take business away from them? And once we have answered these questions, we can then demonstrate the business is possible using a tool such as the opportunity screening checklist. And finally, remember that assignment 1 for this module asks you to make a recommendation on the feasibility of your business. And here you must choose from one of the following decisions: either proceed, do not proceed, or that more research is required. And remember, you must explain your reasoning behind your recommendation. This tutorial is designed to provide a practical example of how we can take an idea and develop this into a product. So for this exercise, examine the Overwatch mini case and reflect on this idea, focusing on the key questions shown here. So firstly, let's look at the extent of the opportunity. Now, in 2014 in the USA alone, 126 police officers were killed in the line of duty. Of this total, 50 deaths were firearms related, and this was a 56% increase from the previous year. Now, many of these deaths involved the use of the officer's own weapon after they had been disarmed, and many ended in compensation payouts to either members of the public or officers' families, largely because the chain of events could not be established beyond reasonable doubt. Overwatch is an aftermarket device designed to provide law enforcement officers with a clear asset, a high-resolution video camera which starts recording once the weapon has been drawn, which can be fitted to a standard handgun via any compatible integrated rail. The device itself is locked onto the trigger guard of the handgun, preventing easy removal by anyone other than the designated user. Overwatch is designed to be compatible with the Glock range of pistols, which currently command 65% of the market share of handguns for United States law enforcement agencies, as well as supplying numerous national armed forces and security agencies worldwide. The most popular models are the Glock 17 and Glock 19, and both feature the universal Glock rail, which allows for the mounting of accessories such as Overwatch. The benefits of Overwatch can be seen as follows. The system provides a high-definition visual record of any police-related shooting incident. The system only starts recording when the pistol is drawn, which limits the need to store digital data. So now reflect on the questions provided and note down your insights. Now, in the second exercise, think about everything we've learned from this session, which should now allow you to be able to complete an opportunity screening checklist for your business idea.